Okay, guys, we're going to talk about greasing equipment, a little bit of equipment maintenance. So greasing is a very important in our industry. We've got a lot of dust, dirt, outside particulates that get in between joints that have a lot of pressure and that are wearable. So we want to maintain those joints, the friction. So we grease them. We typically use a blue grease from Castrol or red and tacky grease. We don't want to use a moly grease or like a lithium grease or anything like that. We want something that's got some durability for what we're doing. So red and tacky, there's a Mystic red and tacky, there's a Lucas red and tacky, there's the Castrol blue stuff that we've been using. That's been a great product as well. A couple quick things. When you're using a grease gun, if you get more grease on the grease gun than you do on the equipment, there's an issue. So you should be able to grease the entire machine without getting grease all over you. When you're using your grease guns, you let's say for instance this image here, this is a quick little hand pump, or actually we'll use this one right here. So this is about the same standard model of grease gun that we use. Now if you will, before you put a new tube in there, if you will take and unwind the canister about 2.5 rounds, okay, when you pull this rod out, it will pull air through the cracks of the joint here versus sucking all of this grease out of this line when it pulls a vacuum. It'll make it to where it primes so much easier. So before you pull this bottom rod, go ahead and just loosen up the top off about 1.5 rounds, 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds. It's not going to hurt you. Then pull this rod and lock it. Once it's locked, then unspin it off, and then you'll grab it. Do not slap the bottom, because what that does is this little ring down here, it ends up rolling it in, and then don't keep very much long. You have to take it all apart and beat it back out with a hammer, and it's a pain in the butt. So push it in, and then the tube will actually slide out. Take the tube off, toss it in a trash receptacle, then pull it back out, reset it, put your new tube in, take your top off, and then screw it back on. Once you have screwed it back on, then release it and push it in there. I'll always leave it, like I say, maybe 3 rounds before I tighten it up. So once I've released the pressure in it, it's pushed the grease up. Then I'll squeeze it by spinning that last 3 rounds. I'll push out the rest of the air. Then a few pumps, maybe 8 to 10 pumps, and you're back prime. If you're having to do it more than 8 to 10 pumps, you probably didn't do it correctly. So work on your technique and try to keep the air from getting in that capacity. But just pump it and it'll go. And if not, loosen it about 3 or 4 rounds, pull on that spring a little bit, and then push it in there. To get the rod to go in, you don't have to whack it. Twist it, and it will loosen up the keeper, and then it'll slide right in. If you ever have to check of how much grease you've got in your grease gun, and if you've got enough to make it around the whole machine, all you got to do is pull that rod out. It'll stop at how much you got left. So it's a full tube. It'll come all the way out, and you twist it and come back in. Or if you're about out, it'll only come out about 1.5 inches. That's how much grease you have. Okay? So these top here, these grease connectors, they're if they ever get stuck, and say you're squeezing on it pretty hard and it's ever getting stuck, you can loosen this thing up, and it loosens the 3 little jaws that are around that zert fitting, and then you can get them off without breaking the zert. So sometimes twisting it back and forth, don't rock it so hard, but if you have to, you can take your pair of pliers and loosen that joint fitting, and then it'll pop right off. These grease fittings are called zerts. Okay, if they have a little needle bearing in there, and the grease pushes back in there, and it's got a spring. And when it stops the grease, the needle comes back, and the little needle bearing clogs up the hole. So before you grease, you take your thumb or a rag or a towel and wipe off the edge of the zert fitting there. And I'll see if I can find this one. And the tip of it before you go to greasing. If not, you're pushing all that grit inside the fitting. Right here is where you would want to clean off. Sometimes I carry me a little wooden stick, and I'll wipe it off, and then, when I do it, I just wipe it up here on the joints. It's fine. Wipe it on the joints. Wipe it on the tracks. It's okay. Don't sling it on the ground where everybody's going to walk around and step in it, and they get back in the cab or they get back in their vehicle. So put it somewhere where it's not going to be a problem. So put it back on the joints. When we're greasing our equipment, we don't have to put 10, 20 pumps on every single joint. You know, for instance, this turntable. So there's a bunch of roller bearings inside here. You know, twice a week, 5, 10 pumps. Once on the back side, once on the front side. You spin your machine this way, spin it back. You know, 5, 10 pumps. That's all it needs. It doesn't need a whole bunch. It doesn't get all that dirty. You know, if we're going to look at, you know, something like this picture here, if I can get it opened up, there we go. If you'll notice, you know, these joints are not down in the dirt so much. So they don't need as much. But this joint gets a lot more pressure than, say, this joint here. This joint, when you're clearing and you're sweeping back and forth and everything, it gets side to side a lot of binds. So you'll get some squeaks. And if you let it go dry, I can promise you it's going to take you 4 or 5 days of greasing to get it back right. So it's going to be hollering at you. So making sure this one's, you know, one that, but you know, this one's not so bad. About once or twice a week, you're good to hit that one there. This one you'll get down here on the boom, and you'll be able to pump those. You know, put 5, 10 pumps in them, you know, every 3 or 4 days. The real critical ones are this one and these down through here. These right through here. These 3 really. These 3 on the excavator are super critical. They are every day, and you better see the grease pumping out on both sides. And I'll tell you, we pump red grease and blue grease. If you see black grease, you've let that grease set in there a little long. So making sure that you're pumping it all the way through. You don't have to have 400 pounds sitting on the outside of this, but it needs to be good and wet. Especially this one down here. This is the number one that takes all the beating, because when you dig, that dirt splashes back in here. Okay, and these are real expensive to rebore and reline them with pins and new bushings and stuff like that, and you'll have a sloppy bucket. And once it goes sloppy, you use 4 or 5 times the amount of grease because it's so hard to keep. So, you know, making sure these options are greased here and there. You know, when you're dealing with, say, loaders, these bottom pins here are critical on loaders. I've seen them where they didn't grease them and they broke the boom. It broke the whole ear off because they was over there pouring oil on it because they couldn't get it. If you have a problem, you need to notify your foreman and have the foreman reach out to Kurt and say, hey, we've got a dry joint. Let's get it fixed. Let's find out what's going on, and then let's work on our maintenance program. So these bottom pins here and here are very critical on a loader. You know, everything else is 2 to 3 times a week, but every single day. Those main pins that are down by the dirt, they are every single day. No ifs and buts. You know, if you're dealing with an off-road truck, you got to grease it. These back pins on the dump beds are very important. These little side pins right here are very important. This little, where it articulates, very important. So making sure you're getting those as well, those are super critical. You know, these are good wet joints here. If you walk up to a machine and you know, it's not looking wet when you go to use it, you need to report that to the foreman and say, hey, I'm about to get on a machine that hadn't been greased. And because if something breaks and we go out there and look at it, and I'm like, well, they didn't grease it. You know, we're going to look at that operator and say, you know, why are you not maintaining your machine? So you don't want to take responsibility for somebody else's deficiencies. Take responsibility for what you do, and that's it. And if it's on them, it's on somebody else. So, you know, on your dozers, you know, you've got right here, let's say on this one here, you know, it's a 4-way blade. So we've got a couple joints here and here and down at the bottom. You know, you've got see that little angle there? That's to spread the dirt over this joint. Well, I can go ahead and tell you, it's still going to get, you know, grease down in here, or it's going to get dirt on there. And you've got a ball and socket down there that needs to be greased and kept after. So making sure you got those points greased. This is a dry joint back here. It's no joint, you know, nothing to worry about. But these, you know, these are ones that people usually don't hit. So don't forget about them, because there's going to be a day you need them and you're going to be frustrated when you have to drive the pins out to get to them. So making sure that you're looking at your joints. Here's an example of those pins that I was discussing earlier. These 2 pins right here are very, very critical. Now, here's a quick safety thing here. You look at this gentleman here. He's in a very precarious situation. Look, this is a big off-road truck. He climbs up here in this off-road truck. So if a gentleman's up here, this truck better be in an off position, tire scotched, and maybe a lockout switch, you know, is done so that nobody cranks this thing up and he's right here and takes off and goes. So when you're greasing your machine, I want to make sure that you have the keys in your pocket. If not, you have the kill switch and you have it with your pocket. But do not go around your machine, and because somebody may hop into it and maybe they missed their walk around. Make sure that you're being safe when you're greasing your machine. Make sure you're wearing conditions. Simple things. Watch out where your head goes, because you'll bump into the thumb and bang the corner of your head. You're supposed to have your hard hat on or something, but things happen. If you're greasing around the thumb, you never know, the hydraulic line could cut loose and fall down on you. So when you're greasing, think about how you're setting your machine up. Think about how you've got yourself positioned. Think about the condition that you're going to be walking in. Don't park the thing in a mud puddle where you got to go out there and tranche around in the mud and get all nasty. And you're frustrated and you're slipping and falling trying to grease your machine and it's cold. So think about those things. Protect yourself. Look out for yourself. If you're going to grease at the evening. Don't grease in the morning. It's cold. It won't flow. You're going to be frustrated. It's not going to get in there. Heck, in the morning you have to go sit them in an exhaust pipe or around an exhaust pipe to get them warmed up, or you have to go sit it grease in the truck, especially in the wintertime. Fuel up and grease up in the evenings. If you fuel up and you're out of fuel on a tank, guess what? You get fuel on the way in the morning. If you get to the job and you're out of fuel and you try to fuel up and grease up and you don't have fuel and you don't have grease, guess what? You can't start work. So every evening, shut down 10 minutes early and go park your machine, clean your cabs out, fuel your stuff up, top everything off, and you'll be good. Also, for your fuel, guess what? Those tanks sweat in and out. If you're filled up all the time in the evening, that tank, when it cools down, it's not going to draw in so much moisture. And that's why when you pop the cap in, you see all that rust, or we have all these water separates because of that condensation. Those things go through heat cycles. So you're making sure that you're greasing in the evenings is very, very critical. It's very important. We need it for life of machines. Ease of use keeps things from breaking. Especially on your skid steers, the bottom pins on your skid steers and the top rocker pins, those definitely are sometimes 2 or 3 times a day in the summertime. Once a day in the wintertime when it's muddy, it's not so bad. But when that dust gets around there, just go ahead and plan on stocking up for grease. So every truck should have a case of grease on it. Minimum 12 tubes, minimum. Keep your grease guns in a clean place. Put your grease gun up. Don't leave the handle all wild. Fold the handle up. Let your last pump be a closed position. Go over and take you a wad of grass or a little rag and wipe your ends off and wipe your gun down and then stow it away. Don't go over there and leaving it nasty for the next person. They will be frustrated with you. So the Lincoln one like this, this is an off-brand, but a Lincoln grease gun is about the best one to get. These little ones that are these little hand ones, don't ever buy them. They do not work, and they will frustrate you. It's fine if you want to go home and grease your go-kart, but it is not worth trying to grease heavy equipment with. We do have the electric ones. We do have air ones. Those are nice. Just make sure they're with a reputable person that's going to take care of them because they are expensive. So, greasing machine, checking your oil, things like that is very important. Stay after them. And if you need any advice, talk to Kurt, talk to our mechanic, talk to our foreman. They'll tell you, what needs to be greased a little more. They'll refine you. But stay on it. It's very important. Thank you, guys. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us.